It's such a privilege to be able to speak to people about our book. Beth and I have been friends since 2013. We worked on an initiative at World Relief where I work around leadership development. Ever since then, we've done projects together. She's been a great friend, a great mentor. And then in 2019, we were presenting at the Christians for Biblical Equality conference in Texas. And we made a presentation around some of the themes in this book that was kind of brewing, and IVP was in the audience and they asked us to transfer those thoughts into a book. So that was the beginning. That was also August 2019, and fast forward a couple of months and we're in COVID, and that's just, as we all know, like a great time to start a creative project and to be kind of writing in a vacuum of sorts, because you're not actually interacting with men or women. You're just sitting in your room on your Zoom calls. And so we were kind of like, is this book even going to be relevant, and how will the world look when we come out of all of this? And we realized very quickly that the world for women in organizations does not look any better. Things are looking as they were, or even worse, as we saw women take on a lot of the caregiving responsibilities, the educational responsibility, the domestic violence rates that went up, all of those things, the Great Resignation, those are all a result of what we've just gone through. And so the themes of this book are more current and prevalent than ever. Just a quick statistic, and many of you have already heard this, so I don't want to be repeating myself, but some of the nexus or impetus for this book were really the statistics on our missional global development sector. And when we call missional organizations, we call them faith-inspired. They're organizations that are inspired by their Christian faith or their religious perspective. These could be organizations that were previously Christian and no longer identify that way. But as we know, those kind of themes that have been a part of the culture are still there. Missional organizations have a very unique placement in this world because of our theology and our worldview. And so these statistics are worse for missional organizations than they would be for secular organizations. So 70% of the people that NGOs, missional organizations serve are women. In my organization, World Relief, 82% of the people we serve are women and children. 60 to 70% of the ones doing the serving are women, whether they're the volunteers, the entry-level staff, or the middle-level staff, they are all women. 70% of those making giving decisions in families and couples are women. Whether they're making that decision for themselves or whether they're making it for the couple, it's women who do the research for the couple and are making these decisions. Yet, less than 15% of the leaders in these organizations are women. And we can all see the disparity, the funnel of who is being served, who is doing the serving, and then who is leading. And this is so important because we know that leadership decisions need to be reflective of those who are impacted by those decisions. And if we have 85% men, white men in most cases, making these decisions, we're having a very skewed outcome in our organizations at the leadership level. These were the statistics that really drove us to, okay, there's an issue here. We got to look at this. We got to dig in a bit. So we started exploring this theme of belonging. And in the book, we quote many, many authors who have done their research around organizational safety and DEI. One of the folks we quote in the book is Sandra Van Opstal, and she is an advocate, pastor, and author living in the south side of Chicago, really elevating BIPOC leaders in her community and globally. And she introduces us to this theme of hospitality to solidarity to mutuality. Hospitality is this moment when leaders decide like, okay, we need more diversity in our organization. And usually this is birthed at a moment like global outrage, right? Like George Floyd demonstrations in the summer of 2020. Those were a significant cultural moment where organizations felt like, okay, we need to get on board. We need to make a statement. We need to make a priority out of diversity because our world is hurting, right? And our lack of understanding the other is causing us to hurt. But in that moment of hospitality, there's still that ability for the leader to take the mic away. And very often they will take the mic away from those they've invited around the table, because in diversity, there is a lot of inconvenience. And there's also this sense of, okay, now things are getting chaotic. Like all of a sudden, I've got all these folks on my team who are expressing these views that I'm not used to hearing, or expressing them in ways I'm not used to. They're questioning me, questioning my authority. I don't like this. So even on this book tour, we've experienced that when we present this book, themes of this book, people say to us, we like what you're saying, we like the message, but we don't like exactly how you say it. You're being a little bit too brash, you're being a little bit too forthcoming, and so we don't want to have a conversation. In order to really move the needle, we have to move from hospitality to solidarity, which is when we allow the stories that others are telling us to break our heart. We allow ourselves to start to feel empathy towards the stories. That person's story may not be my experience, but it is her experience, and it should move me. And then we start to see the richness of that fellowship of those folks, that they cannot do their business without these people at the table, that the diversity, that the homogeneity of the current leadership team is not adequate to solve the problems of our complex world. We don't have the right voices, we don't have the right people, the right questions around the table. And that's when belonging can happen, when we realize we absolutely need diverse voices around the table. So from there, we created this idea of a culture of belonging. And it is a culture, this is our definition, where employees feel welcomed and valued and safe as their genuine selves. This culture is established by leaders who prioritize individuality, well-being, and success of each employee, and in turn, employees who share in the responsibility for the well-being and success of the organization. This is really the idea that if we allow for individuals, for our staff to show up as their genuine selves, right? Like no code switching required, no toning it down required, but really that people can really show up as they are, the organization will be enriched. And that if the staff feels like they are being valued as themselves, then they will turn around and share in the responsibility for the well-being of the organization. So it's a two-way street, but really at the heart of it is this idea that people are allowed to show up as they truly are, as their genuine selves. I say that because my personal testimony of being a leader in this sector is, this is the team I lead currently at World Belief, and we run a massive, big health project in 6 countries. And this is a global team, folks from different cultural backgrounds, and I'm sure you all have the honor of serving on diverse teams as well. But I realized in my leadership that if I did not show up as God had created me and with the leadership skills that God has put in me, I am not going to be successful in leading effectively. And early in my career, I kind of bought into the patriarchy, and patriarchy kind of works for you when you're a young white woman, right? It works for you because you don't have kids, you don't have all these things yet that you have to take care of in your life, right? And you're kind of dedicated to your job, and you're kind of the right person showing up, getting it done. But when you have kids and these things happen, you realize like, oh, the system is rigged and I am not being valued here as myself. And so many women mid-career come to this realization, like, this system has to change for me to succeed. And I was so fortunate to come to this place of like, in order to God to use me as a leader, I have to really lean into who I am and those kind of feminine leadership qualities that he had put in me. So that's my story and why I'm kind of so passionate about this. In our book, we outline some of the women's issues that many of the missional organizations still center, and which makes it so difficult for women to succeed in our organizations. And I think these are global issues, but they are especially emphasized in our faith-based context. We have this preference for male leadership. By the time we're 7 years old, we're socialized to the leadership models that we prefer. And if we grow up in contexts where the pastor in the pulpit is a man, there's there's never a woman there. Women do the serving in the home. We've seen our moms and our sisters serve all through our lives. Hearing messages about women as the weaker vessel in church pews, we don't change, oh, they are adequately qualified to lead, right? So we have this like ingrained preference for male leadership that holds women back. And I've heard even sometimes comments like, I can't hear what she's saying. I can't understand what she's saying. And to me, it's kind of like that the female octave, the voice of the female octave is not something that the male ear is necessarily even trained to hear. So there's just these odd things that are kind of stacked up against women as leaders. Our womanhood is an obstacle. It's an issue. The fact that we can reproduce and we menstruate and we have female bodies. We have maybe bodies that men could look at in a lustful way or something, where we'll incite the Billy Graham rule that men, that this leader does not want to spend time with this subordinate because there's this Billy Graham rule and we need to be very careful of appearances there so we don't get the same opportunities for development or promotions as our male colleagues would, just because we are born into a female body. So there's those things that still are against us. There are missing constructs for women in the workplace. And in the US, this is very glaring, that there's even missing maternity leave. There's missing ability for women to do other care work. Not every woman is going to have children, right? So there are other care work that women are engaged in, and there are not support systems or constructs for women in the workplace for these very, very key functions in the society. So those two things have not been integrated. In the Christian world, we have this concept of a kept woman. And I've encountered this, I don't know if depending on your denominational background, but I've encountered men who are ashamed if their wives have significant careers or leadership positions. I mean, my husband has been teased for some of the work that I do, and they like to call him Mr. Sallinen. Sallinen is my maiden name. He puts them in their place, but I can be pretty vocal, and his buddies are not used to that. So there's still these like old-fashioned things that we deal with. And then minority women face very unique problems. Minority women do not enter our organizations at the same rate as white women or as white men. And so then there's no kind of pipeline for minority women to succeed into leadership roles. So that's a problem if we're looking to diversify. In our book, we propose a systemic approach to organizational belonging. We believe this is a systemic issue. We hear in the news this thing about systemic racism, right? And some people, it's like a very controversial. The reality is that inequality has been mainstreamed into all of our organizational structures. Whether it's been done willingly or unwillingly, it's just simply is there by the history of our organizations. A systemic problem has to be approached with a systemic solution. We can't just expect that one DEI director or one unconscious bias training or one affinity group session will solve this issue that's taken like 100 years to build. World Relief is 80 years old organization. It's not going to be one session that's going to solve something that's been there historically for years and years. So we need this kind of approach, pulling on several levers at the same time to solve the issue. I'll just quickly list them. Imago Dei, which is our theology. Strategic case, which is our ability to make a case for why diversity is so valuable and so good for organizations. And for many leaders, this is the language they'll understand. In the book, this is the research around how much more efficient our organizations are when we diversify our leadership and how much money we're leaving on the table if we don't. Sometimes that's the only language people will understand. Organizational culture, that's addressing all of it, from Me Too and sexual harassment in the workplace, microaggressions, sexism, broke culture, toxic leadership. All of those things are addressed there that are feeding into why women could not maybe get ahead in an organization. Then we have HR policy and procedure, and that speaks to from everything from hiring to celebrating someone's departure in the organization. How does an organization do those things well? Intentional development, which is how do we develop women and how to develop everyone? And then finally, leadership will. And I'll cover just two of those levers here, and then you can read the book for the rest. Imago Dei is addressing theology in our organization. And so why do we address theology first? Often this lever is the one that's missing because it's not a secular issue. Missional organizations like ours, we need theological statements. And the reason for that is that we have staff from many denominations. I mean, unless you work for a purely Catholic organization or purely Presbyterian, that could be the fact. But in many cross-denominational organizations like World Belief, where I work, we have folks from all kinds of very conservative, fundamentalist, evangelical to Catholic to, you name it, we have it. If we don't address as an organization how people feel about women in leadership, they will bring their theological views right into the organization. There are still in the American church views that hold, women back, really do not want women to be in any kind of leadership roles. If you're attending a church where women are not allowed ever in the pulpit, in the elder board, it's maybe hard for you to serve in an organization and say, okay, I would be fine with a woman being the CEO and I would be comfortable working under a woman or respecting a woman in that role. So theological statements will address for our organization, this is how we stand. This is what our perspective will be on this issue. You can have your own theological statement or your view, but we will be addressing it in this way. And that's very important. We also know that if you're an organization, and I can name a few big ones where women will not be able to succeed into top leadership roles. It's an unwritten rule in the culture that women will not. And I think it's fair for those organizations to make that known, to them look at themselves in the mirror and say, yeah, this is who we are. And women should know if they come and serve in this organization, they will not be CEO. And I think that's only fair because women are putting their time and their talent into an organization and they should know if they're never going to have that role. The other one I want to talk about here is intentional development. And before I go into the elements there, so many of the messages we've heard, and I've been around this for almost 20 years now. And, nice girls don't get the corner office and girl boss and tell us how we're supposed to be in the workplace to get ahead, and I'm so grateful because I feel like culture is like flipping some of those messages on their head now. And the message in the book is like, we don't need to develop women by asking them to become something they are not. That paradigm for leadership development is over now. We don't have to tell women that they should be more assertive, and we don't have to tell them that they have to speak in more deeper tones and in more assertive tones. Those days are over, right? I hope that organizations are at a place where they are training women to really succeed as they are and bring whatever your leadership qualities are, right? Like not all women have feminine leadership qualities and not all men have masculine leadership. We all are miracles and we are all unique in the way we lead, but those are the things we need to be digging for, not for, hey, all women should turn into this kind of a leader that we're all comfortable seeing. So I just wanted to give that as a caveat. This is Beth's slide and she does this well because this is really her wheelhouse. The percentage of leadership money to men and women, 70% of the money in organizations go to senior men for leadership development. So these are individuals in the organization who already have a lot of privilege, usually have a lot of understanding and experience in leadership, and they are the ones also receiving more leadership training. This is a definite obstacle for organization in developing their women. The missing first rung speaks to missing a tier. So women enter organization at the junior level. Many of our organizations are built that way. Social services and kind of lower paid jobs where women can easily enter into. But then we were missing the rung of developing. This is year over year, the prominent problem that we have a massive dropout of women in the mid-career, and that also, falls into child rearing years or other pressures that we may be experiencing. And then when it comes time to senior leadership, we don't have the bench to select from. We're missing all these women from the mid-management. So that is the generation of leaders we need to be really investing in. And then there are leadership qualities that everyone in the organization needs to be developing. empathy. I just saw something, Brene Brown did a podcast just this week, and she was talking about these exact things, talking about deep listening and really like a concentrated listening and a desire to understand the other person, bias awareness. So that's where in this mix, bias awareness does have its place. All of us having the awareness of the biases we all carry, right? All of us carry them, and the ability for leaders to have difficult conversations. And that this is exactly important in Christian organizations where we just want to be nice to one another and we don't want to say the hard things, but sometimes it is the best thing to have that difficult conversation. And then just plain old character development. And this has come out of really the Me Too movement as well, that people have an understanding of appropriate behaviors in the workplace. So these are some of the elements of the intentional development. Okay, so I wanted to quickly, before we end and have a quick conversation, I just want to share with you some thoughts about what women can do today to feel like, many of us may be frustrated or we may be discouraged by some of the things in the data we see about, okay, where is our place in organizations? Where is our place in this sector? And I wrote some words of encouragement and want to discuss that a bit. This is my colleague, Jenny Yang. She is an awesome friend and a colleague, and she is a SVP of advocacy at World Relief, and she's a powerhouse. I've seen her career for 10 plus years. She's on Capitol Hill, often speaking truth to power, meeting with the lawmakers, and she advocates on behalf of refugees and immigrants. She had children and she really changed her perspective. I wanted to add this quote here because so important to consider our ambition from a different perspective as well. And she says, I realize that ambition is also saying no to opportunities. Our no can help redefine our mission in life. For young women, I encourage them to be ambitious in ways that affirm who they naturally are and doesn't detract. For women of color, I say no to giving free advice and strategy that doesn't pay for the years of experience you've accumulated. So she's really, and you should go in and read her story, but she's really encouraging women to lean into who they are naturally, and find a lot of the strength for their career and a lot of the ambition for their work in the things that God has put in them. And often we say, well, women aren't ambitious, or, well, is she ambitious enough? Does she really want this? And I just think as a culture, we need to learn to recognize women's ambition, and it may show up in different ways because we have different seasons in our lives. There could be seasons of really high levels of ambition when we're looking to have a lot of good, powerful years in the job. And then there could be like seasons of different kind of ambition as well. I also wanted to talk to you all and read a little part to future leaders. In the words of the psalmist, I praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works. My soul knows it well. Psalm 139:14. For decades, the counsel we've received as women is to change ourselves. In church communities, we must be modest, compliant, and quiet. As mothers, we must turn off our ambition and talent. As leaders, we must turn on our assertiveness and charisma. We learn to hide away and downplay the truest parts of ourselves and make others more comfortable. Many spaces women turn up feel unfamiliar and unwelcoming because we're asked to change so much about ourselves to fit in. But if God wanted us all to parent and lead in the same way, wouldn't he have made us more like an army than the motley crew of fearfully and wonderfully made creatures we are? Mid-century feminist Simone de Beauvoir states, it is in the knowledge of the genuine conditions of our lives that women must draw our strength and our to live and our reason for being. In other words, the places we come from, the intersections of identity, our socioeconomic background, our level of education, our life situations and those we choose to care for, even the trauma we have walked through, must inform how and why we work and lead. These unique things, the genuine conditions of our lives, are what make our contributions to organizations so unique and needed. So really, in this portion, encouraging all of us as women to not shy away from those things that make us unique, to lead, but really lean and search them out. And because it is those things that our organizations need. We don't think that they need that. We don't think that they need our hot mess and our, maybe our inability to do things in a certain way. We don't think that that's valuable. But I beg to differ and say that God has made you the way you are, and that is exactly what the world needs, and then that is exactly what your organization needs. And if your organization does not value that, and you're working in an organization that's making you feel like you should change yourself or you're completely unsuitable all the time, I would encourage us all to relentlessly look for organizations that share our values and value who we are. And I think sometimes that's not easy. We need our paychecks and our health insurance, and we just need the resources, or we love something. But I would just say, and that's why this alliance is such a great place too, because I hope we can network here and bring to the table what we do well and meet some people who can maybe then introduce us to someone else, etc. So it's just a great place for us as women to network with one another and then build a bigger table. And that's part of this alliance, and just ourselves, when we become leaders, making sure that we don't become the gatekeepers then of that room, but we're pulling people and seats right next to ourselves all the time, making sure that others are there included, that we become the includers. So those are some thoughts from the book that's available today. So excited to be here, and thank you so much for letting me share. And I would love to hear some thoughts and talk with you.